welcome to week 2. You've all survived week 1. So this week, me and you, we're going to make our first pair of trousers, a very simple pair. And it's all about a flat front waist with an elasticated back.
Here is in 2 pieces. Yours can be cut on the fold so it's 1 piece. The back of the waistband is elasticated. My elasticated waistband is in 2 pieces. You can draft yours to 1 piece. Whenever we draft a pair of trousers, we have to think about the planning. So we need to bear in mind that we're going to have a pair of pattern pieces for the front. We will have a pair of pattern pieces for the back. We will also have our waistband pieces. I've got this woven elastic. So I've got the basic outline shape here as my starting point. The next thing that I need to do is everything that's written. I'm also going to draft myself a grain line. That's my grain line. And I need to add the points that tell me this is where the knee is. This is where the crotch line is. And we've also got the hip line because we drafted a horizontal line that was like 45 centimeters down from the top of the page. So we've got the hip line in. Size with the leg styles, that's a guide, a starting point to tell you this is what you may want to achieve. But you may draft these trousers and take 3 centimeters off on each side and then make them and think, oh, they're a little bit too tight. So this is where you make changes on your working pattern. So today I'm going to measure in 1 centimeter. I always start at the bottom and I work up. I've measured in 1 centimetre and I've made myself a mark. And I know at the legs, I'm not going to take much off there. I'm going to keep the legs relatively straight. So I'm going to follow that line. So to get this nice curve here, because from the hip line, this is our hip line here. I'm just going to add hip. From the hip line, and I'm going to put a cross here because I know I'm ignoring those lines. That's me telling myself these lines now don't exist and this is my new line. I'm going to want to veer on in here. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to follow this line. So I've decided I want it from the hip line. To be able to do that, we're going to pivot. So what I'm going to need to do first, so what I want to do is I want to be able to trace this line to keep this line. So what you're going to do is I've made lots of little dash lines here. That tells me this is the area I'm starting from. I've put a little T there and I've just come straight off because I know that's where it's going to hit the leg. So I've created my little dash lines. Turn your sheet of paper over and on the opposite side of the paper, trace the dash lines. Just so that the dash lines are stronger and you can see them on both sides. Place the paper back where the T is, where your hip line is, and what we're going to do is we're going to pivot. So when we pivot, you can see I've got the point of my pencil, and the only thing I am moving is the bottom of the pattern paper. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I'm keeping the original line. So what I'm doing is I'm going over my dash lines. I'm just going over them nice and strong so that I'm effectively tracing through. Smooth. And I'm gonna put across there so that I know those are the lines that I'm ignoring, and I know this is my new. So we're on the waistband now. So my waistband, I've decided is going to be 3 centimeters. So what I want to do is I'm going to build my waistband onto this pattern piece to tell myself this is the outline of the waistband that I'm going to try and create. So I'm going to extend my centre line on both pattern pieces. It just helps me as give me a guide. With the centre front piece, it's got a curved waistband. And I've decided that I want to keep that curve because I quite like that curve. So I'm going to use my ruler and I'm going to come up 3 centimeters. I'm using a different ruler. I've made myself a mark. I've made myself another mark. Now I've got my centre line as a guideline. I've just drawn myself a light line to tell myself that's where the 3 centimeters will be. I'm going to cut myself some pattern paper again because I want to keep that curved waistline because I like the shape of that. It looks nice. So what I'm going to do is the same thing again. I'm going to trace that waistband. And the important points are where the waistband starts and stops. So it's got like some T's at the end. And what I do is I trace it, just add a mark for the centre line as well. And all I do is I just raise it up. You'll need to do the same thing if you haven't got carbon paper. Turn it over, make your lines stronger, your little dash lines. Turn it back. Put it back in the right place so you know this is where you've traced it from originally. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to raise it up. So I'm using this centre line, I'm just following that line to where the waistband will be. And I'm going to trace back over my dash lines. So I know my new waistband is going to be here. I've got the outline. I can see my dash lines and I'm basically following my dash lines to create myself a new waistband, which is there. And I want to keep the shape because I quite like the shape. So how does all this information that I've given you make sense? So I'm just going to pan back and this is my working pattern. This is the pattern that I traced off from my block. You can see there I changed the style lines. And then what I did was once I was happy, so I've made this toile. I made a first toile and I made it out of a bed sheet. And then once I was happy, I checked the elastic, worked out how I was going to put it together because it's like a jigsaw puzzle. I then colour coded my lines because I know that this pattern I'm going to be able to make it a few times. So with regards to the waistband, as we talked about, the waistband comes in separate pieces. This is my centre front waistband, and what I've done is I have added the seam allowance. So in this instance, my seam allowance is 1 centimetre, and I can put that back over my pattern piece and know that it is accurate and it's right. However, to save myself time, what I want to do is I'm going to make it on the fold. That way my whole waistband at the front will be nice and flush. So what I did was traced off my waistband onto a separate sheet of pattern paper. So this is my back waistband, and this was actually my first toile. I've labelled it #1. I label my pattern piece. I've added things like the grain lines, I've added the centre line there, and more importantly, I've added notches so that I'm able to match up the pieces when I sew my toile. So when I'm going to sew my trousers together, and I'll send you the instructions for the sewing, the main thing that you need to remember is to put balance marks in. Balance marks are really important because they tell us where to stop and where to start sewing. So we always put a balance mark, just going to pan over to the crotch line. We always put a balance mark here at the crotch line, at the crotch point, to tell us this is where to stop sewing, because we know that that distance is going to change depending on the size, so it really helps us out. Also, when you're making your leisure pants, you're going to put the fronts and the backs together. You're going to go through the basic construction process of putting a pair of trousers together. You need to put yourself a balance mark 5 centimetres down from the top. So from the top, measure 5 centimetres down in this direction and put a balance mark here. You are then going to focus on your waistband. And then once the waistband is half in place, you're going to close this area, and that's the reason we do it that way. So there's very much sewing and pattern cutting is very much about sequence and order of events. And if it helps, you need to write yourself notes as you're going along, so that you can tell yourself this is what you're going to do and this is the way that you're going to do it, and this will help you for when you make your pair later on.